Hey, Deliberate Leaders. I am Allison Dunn, executive coach and host of the Deliberate Leaders podcast, where we are dedicated to helping leaders build strong, thriving businesses. Each episode, we feature an inspiring interview to help you on your leadership journey. And I'm so excited to introduce today Ira Wolfe. He is an HR visionary thinker, an accomplished speaker and author of The Recruiting in the Age of Googlization. Ira has been the leader in pre-hire and leadership assessments, recruitment, marketing, and workforce trends for over 25 years. He put forth the passion and mindset required for the convergence between people and technology. And I kind of love this description. He's been described as the millennial trapped in a baby boomer's body and the world's first Googlization officer, which I think is Chief Googlization Officer. Ira, welcome to the Deliberate Leaders podcast.
It's my pleasure to be here. Very excited to join you today. Thanks.
Fantastic. I love to kick these off with a quick, deliberate conversation. And I say quick, meaning, it's just a small part of what we're going to talk about. But what would be your number one leadership tip that you would give our leadership listeners today?
Great question. Probably being adaptable. Working a lot on that, how to be adaptable. And we'll talk a little bit down the show. And actually, this wasn't a setup, but it was a good setup for me because we actually just released an adaptability quotient.
Fun.
Yeah. It's actually a lot of research was done into it, partnered with a group that had been doing that. I'm really excited. We actually haven't even officially made it available yet. Still some finishing, the assessment's done, but the portal and access. But we definitely can talk about it. So adaptability is no question the number one skill that in fact, I just wrote an article, was adaptability is everyone's job these days.
Is that not so the truth, especially right now? I think, I love that as a tip. I think that it's critical, especially now more than ever. What would be the tip that you would give based on the research you've done when someone should identify that they're not being adaptable enough?
Well, one is it's interesting because the assessment broke it down into three areas, and this was based on research from universities, organizations, science-backed, even involved with Singularity University. So a lot of people were involved in identifying this, and they identified three areas, and the acronym's ACE, ACE. So one is your ability. So some people have, maybe it's their cognitive abilities. Not that they're not smart, but they may overthink things. Okay. But some people are more open-minded and more curious. So those are all ingredients. And so one's ability, the other's character. Your personality does impact that. Extroverts are going to be more engaged. Introverts are going to think about it a little bit. So you're how you manage the stress. Are you resilient, or do you have grit? Whatever words we want to throw out. Some of they become buzzwords, but that all makes up our character. But the third part is super important, and it's our environment, and it's the cultures and the companies and the people we hang with, and the education system. And sometimes people have the ability and they got the right character, but they're just stifled. And other times they're given opportunity, but their personality or ability holds them back. So there's actually 17 different dimensions that were identified as critical. So it was tough to say, what does somebody need to do? The one thing I would tell everybody, if there was one out of all those areas that I would suggest doing, actually there's two. The very first one is being open-minded. Even more so than being curious, is at least if you're open-minded, then you probably are curious. But if you're curious, it doesn't mean you're open-minded. So
Very true.
You may find a rabbit hole to go down and really curious about that rabbit hole, but it may not open you up. So I would say open-mindedness. I always quote her. I quote her a lot rather than spending all our time going into it. But Carol Dweck, DWECK wrote a book on mindset, and she talks about the fixed and growth mindset. And growth mindset is just so critical that we allow ourselves to make mistakes. Nobody's going to be perfect moving forward. You know, I heard this from some of the top people, really experts from military, government organizations, CEOs, early on in the pandemic, and they said everybody's faking it. And when you heard that from some of the most successful people in the world, that, hey, we're all just faking it, you know, to get through this, what they're allowing themselves to do is make mistakes, and hopefully none of them are fatal or lethal mistakes. But you know, taking little baby steps. We have to allow ourselves to make mistakes.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate your insights into that, and I do think open-mindedness is super key.
Yeah, the other one, which is also interesting, is unlearning. Unlearning is becoming, you know, it started as like, yeah, unlearning. Unlearning is hard to do because our brains are wired. I mean, you know, now that we understand what neuroscience looks like, there's patterns. There's actually a great video. I would suggest people, you can go to YouTube. It's not mine, but I just discovered it about a couple weeks ago, and I thought it was a brilliant idea of how difficult it is to unlearn. It's called the backwards bike. I don't know if you've seen that. Have you seen the
I have not. I am definitely Googling this.
It absolutely is the best example. This guy's a mechanic, was an engineer, and he's now working on his PhD. He's got a whole bunch of degrees, very theoretical guy, but young guy, great personality. And he talks about what he did was they took the shaft from the bicycle, the steering column, and he got a mechanical engineer to reverse the gear. So when you turn left, you turn the handlebars left, the wheel turns to the right, and vice versa. And you go, oh, well, you'll learn how to do things opposite. It's like when I've gone to England or Australia, we've learned to drive on the other side of the road, and it takes a little getting used to until you go around the roundabout or a circle, you know, and that's a little harrowing. But then when I came back, then I was struggling when we landed in New York, and I struggled in New York. Which way do I turn? But you're hardwired, so you know you learn to adapt. The bicycle is really, really hard because you balance yourself by making these little adjustments. So it's not like, oh, it only matters when you turn. It was a great example of how difficult it is to unlearn. And we're all in this, we all have to unlearn when people say we need to go back to normal, there is no going back to normal. And we all have to make room in our brains to move to this next normal. But part of adaptability, one of the skills in adaptability, sub-skills in adaptability, is unlearning what we need to unlearn.
Yeah. Wow.
You kicked it off, right?
Yeah, that's it. And on it, I think that it is, it's not a topic that anyone is talking about, but how so relevant that is. And I think a lot of examples right now.
Yeah. Sorry, and I appreciate the opportunity. Hopefully there will be a lot more people talking about it after this.
I know that you are kind of, labeled as a visionary thinker in HR. And so right now, I just believe we're at this pivotal point in our world, in how we work, a way we think about recruitment and hiring. And I'm just curious, in your crystal ball, Ira, how do you see, what is your outlook on hiring for, going forward? There's sort of the shovel to teaspoon analogy that teed up a topic to talk about. So what's your outlook?
We're going to hire. Companies are going to hire people. The hiring, one is anyone who thinks that hiring got easy because we now have 15 or so million people on the unemployment rolls, 50 million people on unemployment claims, that are either partially or being subsidized by PPP or unemployment or something. The fact of the matter is we still have a skill shortage for basically lower skilled jobs and some frontline jobs, such as in hospitality and things, although those are relatively skilled these days as well. But there's going to be an abundance of people. But I can't tell you how many calls and panels and conversations I've been involved with. that the skilled labor market, whether it's an engineer, data science, or sales, management, leadership, the skill gap got much worse in the last 6 months. So despite the unemployment numbers, the difficulty in finding people who have the skills to do what you want to do. And then on top of that, not only do they have to have the skills to do the job they used to do, but now they have to have the skills to be able to work remotely or telecommute or work with people who telecommute. So, there's two sides of it. Can you do the job? And then can you manage the people that are doing the job or communicate with the people that are doing that? It's just got a whole lot complicated. So where everybody says, wow, we lucked out this time. It's the skills gap was just going to crush us in January. Where are we going to find the people? And shoot, we had all these people that are unemployed now. We'll be able to get through this and give us time. That's not true, because 6 months later, people are really, really struggling to find people in many industries, almost all the geographic areas. There's certain pockets, there's certainly communities that don't have enough jobs, but it's here. So my analogy is you mentioned, for the people in the north, and I know you were from New Hampshire, I'm from Pennsylvania,
Yeah.
people that understand that it's literally because there's just more people applying for the job, but there's still X number of jobs, and there's still not a lot of talented people. It's like what talent acquisition is going to be like, recruitment is going to be like, is shoveling out of a blizzard with a teaspoon. For the people in the South, it's going to be draining a flood with the straw. So all that happened was there's just a lot more people that are applying. I had a client the other day, it's now about a month ago, and they started to rebound, and he called me and he said, "You were so right. We used to this was his words, we used to get 20 to 25, maybe 50 applicants from Indeed. Out of that, 2 or 3 might have been remotely qualified. Mm-hmm. Within 24 hours, they had 1,300 applications, and they did not have a system in place. They didn't have an ATS. We're just a small company. We don't need anything like that. Wasn't worth it. The process is in place. You just can't do it through email and spreadsheets anymore. And the good candidates are going to wait around, which gets into competitive experience.
Yeah. That is a fortunate challenge, like a shift, as opposed to not having enough, but then to have a whole bunch of maybe unqualified candidates that you still have to sift through and figure out how to deselect and
It's a combination of both, because
right?
There may be some candidates that are looking, but I can tell you the good candidates are selective, even if they're out of work. Yeah. Many of them, again, were on PPP, they're on subsistence. Some of them, they're not ready to jump back in to the market. So you still have to, have a great candidate experience, present yourself, have a robust culture that people want to work there for the talented people. There are people who want a paycheck. The people who just want a paycheck, you're going to be overwhelmed if you don't have a good screening and selection process.
For sure. So you spoke about the North and the South. Do you have any predictions for kind of my side of the country where I am today, which is in Idaho?
It's universal. This is global. Everybody's struggling with it. There's going to be pockets. I did a presentation for the Missouri State SHRM the other day, and it was virtual, of course. But there was a chat going on the side, and people were talking about there were people saying, "Oh, we just can't find people," and then in the same token is like, "Oh, we've got like 22% unemployment in our area." But I pulled it up on a map, and they were literally between Chicago. They were 100 miles from Kansas City, and I can't remember what the next closest city in Illinois was, but they're basically in the middle of nowhere, and their economy was not robust before. So they depended partly on agriculture, partly small manufacturing, small businesses, and they're hurting. So they just don't have jobs. So it depends. You're going to hear stories like that, oh, how bad it is. But I can tell you that if we really truly had a mobile society where people can pick up and move and not worry about selling their house and do all those sorts of things, certainly a lot of millennials and Gen Z are in that place. But overall, I mean, it's pretty remarkable. Our economy was pretty resilient to even be at the place it is now. And considering how many people are unemployed and the crisis we're still in.
For sure. Insights into kind of what we're experiencing like right here is we're an influx market. We're definitely getting a lot of movement towards Idaho because of just the associating states around it. It's a beautiful place to live and a place to start a business or move your business. But we've also had that combination. So we have small businesses coming. But we also have a large plant distribution facility from Amazon. And what
Isn't everybody?
I suppose that's true, right?
Yeah, we have
True.
4 of them now. So.
Oh my goodness. And so we're just now seeing the impacts of what an employer of that size can do to our labor markets just in general, which is incredible. So
if there's a word, we talked about, a word for leadership. I think if there's a word that describes the time we're living in is disruptive.
yes. Yeah.
And again, disruptive, transformational is literally a kind word when we talk about leadership and what we need to do. We are living in a disruptive time, and of course, I've got the acronym that we talk about, which is VUCA. Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I've been talking about that it's been around for 30 years. I did not make that up. It came from military history and their understanding what the world was going to look like in 1990 after the Berlin Wall came down, what the world was going to look like. And they anticipated terrorism and a number of other enemies that we'd have to face. And they came up with, how do you function in a VUCA world? Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And then it got picked up by business, saying that was what our future was going to be. But people didn't really get it. They understood volatility. Yeah, we have our ups and downs and uncertainty and complexity, but we're living in it. I don't know of a better acronym that describes 2020.
Yeah, I agree, VUCA. I know that everyone keeps on talking about getting back to normal, right? And I don't even know, new next, new normal. I don't know what you're coining it as, but where do you see us heading, even especially since we're in an amplified VUCA world?
Yeah, well, one is I wrote an obituary to normal, and it's up on my LinkedIn profile. So anybody who wants to search for it, it's obituary to normal.
You wrote, on a bit because it died. Oh,
yeah, normal died, and everybody's mourning and grieving it. And left behind is a wife. Mr. Normal left behind certainty, his wife's certainty, and his daughter consistency. So, So very short, it's only like 3 paragraphs, but it basically is where everybody's grieving and they want to go back to the way it was. It's not going to happen. It never has, we never will. We're not going back. But like you, it's like whatever we want to call this. I struggle because I don't like the word the new normal. I've played with next normal. A couple of people I've interviewed and talked to and I respect, they talk about future next. Another colleague of mine talks about normal 2.0, whatever you want to call it. We're moving somewhere forward. We're not going back. And so whatever you want to call it, I even just saw this, and again, I've got to go to people that are a lot smarter than I am on predicting what not necessarily trends are going to be, but when's the economy going to recover? When are we going to come out of this? And that's going to sort of set the foundation for some type of new normal mindset, new normal lifestyle. And at best, they're talking 2022. So it's not that far off anymore. I mean, crazy to think that 2022 is only 15 months away, or approximately, whenever you're listening to this. But it's going to be very, very different in ways that we couldn't possibly imagine, to the point where just about a year ago, right now, I gave a presentation on, it was Workforce 2030 was the title of it. And it was a keynote. And I talked about whatever you thought was going to happen in 2050 was probably going to happen in 2030. Whatever you thought was going to be 2030 at the pace that things were accelerating was probably 2025, and then we had the pandemic. And the reality is a lot of the predictions from 2030, including telecommuting, working from home, happened in 2020. And so a lot of the predictions, like the Jetsons of flying cars, it's not going to happen. But there's a lot, even autonomous vehicles, the acceleration of autonomous vehicles, picked up. It didn't slow down. It's not like, oh, we got to table that and put that off a couple of years. It accelerated. And what I found was very interesting, kind of a short story in my book, Recruiting in the Age of Googlization. So for anybody who wants to read about some of what my predictions were, but you're not a recruiter, you're not an HR, the first 130 pages has nothing to do with recruitment. The first 130 pages was originally titled When the Shift Hits Your Plan. And it was about VUCA and what the world, and I wrote a couple pages in there about what our world will look like when we have autonomous vehicles, and what happens to the Wawas and the Sheets and the Turkey Hills and the little convenience stores. What happens to all the shops along the way? What happens to hotels that you don't have to sleep in because you go in the autonomous vehicle and it'll drive you there? We experienced that in the pandemic when we shut down in April and May. Of people didn't have to go to the convenience store to get gas. People didn't go to the convenience store and stop and get lottery tickets and cigarettes and milk, because we weren't driving by there, and that's the world. I mean, basically, we got a glimpse inside what our world will look like when we have autonomous vehicles, what our urban center is going to look like when there's not, a couple thousand cars coming in every day, and we rely more on public transportation, or we work from home.
You use the term Googlization, and I'm just, you're the chief chief Googlization officer. What is Googlization? And do you have to pay or get permission to use that term?
No, and hopefully that's not going to change. So, I basically came up with that when I wrote my prior book called Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization, which is since adopted that for my podcast. So it basically was at the time everybody was talking about the 4 or 5 generations working in the workplace simultaneously. That was a big deal. We had, that was about the millennials, and now we got Gen Z, but we basically had Gen X, baby boomers, traditionalists, and even if you want to go earlier than that. So we had multiple generations, and everyone was focused on what are we going to do about that. And I said that wasn't the problem. We had multiple generations working simultaneously, which was a challenge. But the bigger challenge was about the technology. And you had people that were the geeks and the geezers. Had young, like myself, I use a lot of technology. I'm definitely an older baby boomer. There was a lot of young millennials who weren't using technology. So there was even another category. What Googlization became was really the convergence of business, technology, and people. And they were all changing. The people were changing, the technology was accelerating, and business was evolving. And Googlization just was that. Now, Googlization was also written about almost at the same time by somebody else. And again, it's just an era, it's a period of time. And so I'm very careful, though, not to infringe upon Google, even using their colors. Or, we almost had Googlization in the different colors that reflected Google. But Googlization, they were living in an era of Google. I mean, they set the ball rolling, especially with search, and now with quantifying all the information that's out there available, making it accessible. It's just amazing. I remember the first search engine, how clumsy it was. You typed in something and it was like, why in the world is this coming back? Now it predicts what you're going to type in.
Yeah.
You type 3 letters in and it comes up. It's like, how did it know I was thinking about this?
When I go to ask a question and the question's already there, I'm like, oh, I'm not alone, thankfully.
Yeah, or it's reading your mind.
Or it's reading my mind. One of those things. I would love to wrap up with a couple of thoughts that you have on how it is that as organizations are trying to recruit and reach top talent, how do we need to think differently about it from like the acquisition, any thoughts on we need to evolve to?
Well, you definitely become smarter, and I highly encourage people to use technology, but don't rely on the technology to solve the problem. Just like people said, oh, now we got Indeed, we can just go out there. Indeed didn't solve the problem. People bought an ATS and they used the technology to fix the problem, and they basically purchased somebody else's workflow, that designed it, or it was tested on, and people adopted it. You still have to, you need to use technology to automate what can be automated. But the purpose of this technology is to free up your time so you can connect with the people that are qualified. So rather than sifting through 100 or 50 or 1,000 resumes manually and entering them into a spreadsheet, automate part of that. By doing that, you allow yourself to respond to the top candidates and also respond to the people who didn't make it. I mean, one of the things that people hate is technology basically took the human out of HR, because people relied on it was easy to apply, but then they fell into the HR black hole and never heard from them ever again. There are ways to use the technology to keep in touch with human beings, and then allowing you to have faster, more effective conversations with human beings. That's the direction you're going to go. That's your roadmap. If you're not going to do that, then it's going to get really, really hard to find good people.
It's an interesting in thinking that that's the tip, and yet I think that that's the way it always should be done anyways. Making that human,
yeah, people
right?
just defaulted, hey, we're going to get it. The technology won't let us do it this way. So I guess since other companies are using it, that's the right way to do it. And it's turned out one of the craziest things, and I know you want to wrap up, but so I'll leave it with this. The talent board, and I suggest you can go up to the talent board, just search for the talent board.
Okay.
They do a massive survey every year. And it'll be really, really interesting this year. But the 2020 report that came out in the beginning of the year before the pandemic shared that since 2016, candidate resentment's a pretty strong word, not just that they're dissatisfied or upset. Candidate resentment increased 40% between 2016 and 2019, which is absurd, because with all the technology, it should have improved. With all the focus, with all the people trying to do better, it should have improved, and yet it got much worse because people defaulted to the technology to do the job. And again, the technology should be selected, and it should do what needs to be done to remove the tedious, repetitive work so you can respond to candidates faster.
Yeah. I appreciate that. One of the things that I work with in from a coaching standpoint is that your brand imprint that you're making on candidates who are saying that they want to work with you can either be really good or really bad. And you get to choose, which way it is. So I would agree that that makes a lot of sense, actually, and that's sad, actually.
Yeah, and even within this, we started the conversation with adaptability.
Yeah.
HR needs to be adaptable. And,
Yes.
and traditionally it has not been. They've been sort of the compliance administrative people, box checkers, trying to hold the fort down, not allowing the company to get in trouble and get sued. That's true. That's still the role. But HR needs to really be much more adaptable. And basically it's an opportunity to be leaders and lead the way, and teach people how to be adaptable.
Ira, it has been such a pleasure to have this conversation with you. I definitely would want to ask you if our listeners wanted to follow you, where's the best platform for them to check you out at?
I'm most active on LinkedIn and then indirectly Twitter from that. But most conversations I have, most connections, is the easiest way for me personally. My website, Success Performance Solutions. I've got a personal website, irawolfe.com, but LinkedIn is where most of my communication goes on. And then I'd also like to offer for anybody who's interested, you can go to besthrbook.com. That was an award I got for it. So from Book Authority, they selected as one of the best HR and recruiting books of all time. But if you go to besthrbook.com, you can actually order the book for free. They only charge us a few dollars for shipping. So you can get Recruiting in the Age of Googlization. As I said, the first half of the book has nothing, it was just about change. And the last half of the book is what recruiting is going to look like in the next normal. So.
Fantastic. Well, there's a couple of big takeaways for me from our conversation today, but I'm going to have to look around where I can start to unlearn things that are no longer helping me. So, Ira, thank you so much for your time. It has been a pleasure.
It has been a pleasure. Thank you very much. Stay safe, everyone.
Thank you.